Okay, so we're going to talk about successful cover cropping with winter grains, and everybody else has done awesome this morning. I really enjoyed all the presentations and especially the pictures. I'm a pictures guy and a stories guy, not so much a data and graphs, but I'm going to have some data and graphs for those who want to see them. My name's Wade Dooley, as I said. I'm the 6th generation on my family's farm. We're located here in central Iowa, right outside the little bitty town of Albion, which nobody's ever heard of, and that's fine. But we farm a lot of different ground around here. Most of our farm is river bottom, and the river's gone down now, but we were pretty flooded here about 2 weeks ago. We've been wet all spring, not as wet as other parts of the country, and I feel bad for you folks. But with our ground, we've had to change our systems and our practices over time. And so we've been doing cover crops since 1997, and we started with that simply because of a flood. We had corn on the river bottom, and it flooded out. And so my dad put in winter rye, and we grazed cattle on it in the fall, and it worked awesome. We had never done anything with small grains for decades. The last small grains that were grown on this farm were some oats Dad put in the early 80s, and that was the last of the small grains in this area. So it was a new experience for us. We learned a lot. Over the years, we've been expanding our cover crop acres to the point now we're doing everything is cover cropped. I started raising small grains in 2014 because, well, we needed more rye seed, and the market went pretty high. And so I said, well, I can raise my own rye, which at the time I didn't realize that there are a few extra steps you got to do to be able to raise a good small grains crop, but I've learned. And since then I've raised oats and wheat and rye, buckwheat and a few other things. We've done a ton of different cover crop mixes thanks to the small grains in the rotation. We're able to do a lot of different summer mixes as well, which can really change the ground if you do it right. And you can learn a lot if you do it wrong. I started doing custom seeding after I bought a big grain drill to be able to put in my own small grains. And so I've branched off that now into its own little company, and I do custom seeding for all the neighbors around the area that will hire me. And I also, because I raise my own small grains, I then turn around and sell it. So I now sell certified oats and certified rye off the farm, which is nice. It's another crop for me, basically. It's not a big money-making system, so don't think you're going to get rich by raising grains, but it's another branch. So there's our typical extended rotation. Every field is different, and so I don't have a specific formula. This one gets this crop and this crop and this crop year after year after year. We change and adapt to the needs and the situations we have. We've got a lot of ground that's had tile work done, and so we try to time it out so that we do a small grain crop, and then after the small grain harvest, we have all summer to get the tile company to come in and do the tile work, and they really like it because they're able to work in August when it's not cold and wet, and we really like it because it gives us the entire fall then to fix all the mess that they make. And so it works out well that way. It gives us an opportunity to change our weed pressures and to maybe fix waterways and that sort of thing. We are 100% no-till nowadays, but we used to be full width tillage. I should have said we are 100% conventional. We have no organic here. Nothing against organic, it's just we're not set up for it very well with the ability to track. But today's conversation isn't about our system so much as it is the greater system of cover cropping, or what was once called green manuring. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about a study that I did as part of a longer, greater study with Practical Farmers of Iowa on interseeding clover into small grains, and then also doing summer seeded mixes after small grain harvest to see what the effect would be on corn crop the next year. Because once upon a time, corn made money. Maybe not this year, but what our study did was we did replicated strip trials on farm. I did a trial on my farm back in we started in 2015, 16, and it was a continuation of what other farmers had done on their farms in 2014 and 2013 and so on. So this isn't something that I just came up with. It was a part of a whole system, and it's been replicated again over and over again since then. And the numbers pretty much come up the same every time. So what we did was our strip trials were red clover. I did red clover and sweet clover because I'm a big fan of diversity. I don't like to just throw one seed out there for a cover crop. I want to have a couple species if I can, so that if one thing is more suited to an area, it's there, as opposed to something that wasn't well suited to a spot and then we've got nothing. So I did red clover and sweet clover, and then the non-clover strips were oats, sorghum, Sudan grass, field peas, and rapeseed. Now, the reason we went with that mix was because back in 2015, it was really hard to get pre-made mixes, and it was difficult to get a lot of cover crop seed when you needed it. And we were kind of running on short notice because, of course, I put everything off. So this is the seed mix we could get, and so that's what we used. There are better ones out there. This is not one I would recommend for a summer mix, quite frankly. So what we were looking for with this trial was to see what we could do with the corn crop following. How much can we cut our nitrogen cost and still maintain, or at least not lose too much money doing it? My goal, of course, is to make as much money as I can without spending much money. And today's farming system seems to be a bit stronger on the spending of money than it is the making of money. There's a lot of folks out there that believe you have to buy inputs to get any bushels. And I'm much more along the lines of, we take the bushels we have and we sell them and we make the money. So this is what we did for our trial. I'm not going to read down the list, but basically I wanted to cut my nitrogen rate down to 100 pounds an acre. If I could cut lower, I was going to, but this was like a safe line to me. Our average nitrogen application in this part of Iowa with the soil types we have, it varies field to field, but we're usually in the 155 to 165 pounds of nitrogen applied for corn. And that'll get us, on the good ground, it'll get us 230 bushel corn. On the ground that I did this trial on, it would usually get us around 185 bushels of corn. So there's your basic baseline. So we didn't add any more than 100 pounds of nitrogen to this trial to really test the theories. And we did the late spring nitrate test, and it said don't spray or don't fertilize. So we didn't add any fertility, but it did show up some yellowing. I didn't take pictures of it because it was just that little weird kind of neon green cast to the strips, which doesn't show up the best in photographs. But here's our results. We also did biomass samples and everything. There's a whole research report on this trial on Practical Farmers of Iowa's website. But the long and the short of it was, the biomass samples we took had the same amount of nitrogen, or darn near the same amount of nitrogen, between the clover plots and the non-clover plots at, I think it was just before frost in the fall of the seeding year. And our yields for corn the following year, the clover out-yielded by far the non-clover mix. And quite frankly, the bushels per acre were fantastic. For 100 pounds of applied nitrogen, I got as good or better yield on those strips than if I'd have put 160 pounds of nitrogen on with no cover. And so the no cover, losing that extra nitrogen, it cost quite a bit. It was a significant drop. It's still not terrible yields. There's a lot of parts of this country where 160 bushel corn is pretty darn good. And 160 bushel corn at 100 pounds of nitrogen isn't bad. If I'd have had a different mix, I might have bumped those numbers a little better in my, if I'd have had a different cover crop mix. But for this experiment, this is what I got. So that was significant for me, and it changed how I was operating some of my farm. Now, the test continued after my farm and went on, and so another farmer up in northern Iowa who is 100% organic, and he's been doing it a long time, so he's got everything nailed down pretty good, and he's done a lot of trials, and he knows exactly what he's doing on his trials, and he did a lot more replications than I did. His data is even better, and on organic ground, he did all this. The mix he used was specifically so he could graze it. Now, my farm, where we had my trial, didn't have any fences, and I couldn't get cows on it. I would have if I could have, but I didn't. He had it in an area where he really could graze, so he was able to graze all of his seeding in the fall, so he gained a lot of added value off of that that isn't reflected in the analysis. But if you've got livestock and you're going to use cover crops, you might as well put the animals on it, because there's really no downside to it as long as you're able to manage your animals and manage the cover as well. So his results were just as impressive as mine as far as yield and difference. The clover out-yielded the non-clover mix by far on his corn crop, and he got good grazing off of it. The clover had really good high protein values. He did biomass samples. Those numbers came back really good. I would say I think his biomass for the non-clover cover was higher, which it should be given the mix that he used. But again, it went into and through the animals, and so that helped on his feed costs, which were not reflected on this particular study. But yeah, so this has been done multiple times. This isn't anything new. This isn't rocket surgery. Clover in small grains has been used as a nitrogen source for crops for hundreds of years. This is not a new theory, and I love seeing it when people can make it work. It doesn't always work. Something that we've got to be very aware of is, covers have a place. They are a tool, but not all tools work all the time, and not all covers need to be in every place. So, something like this where we're planting green into clover, that's putting corn into clover, that's pretty risky. And it can work out really well. It looks really cool. But it also has some significant risks that some folks are a little leery of. I wouldn't recommend doing something like this if you're not really on top of your game and really have your chemical program ready. I did not have my chemical program quite as good as I thought it was, and I got dinged on it. This isn't obviously the same trial as before because we did the whole field this way, but doesn't it? I was super thrilled about that. I got the planter set right, everything was cool, and then my herbicide program was not up to snuff. Still had good yields and only put on 100 pounds of nitrogen, so I wasn't that upset, but it didn't look that great to start. Clover can be used in a lot of places. It is not the only thing to put out there. I don't use clover every year. I try, but it doesn't always work. The last 3 years around here, we've been very wet, or very dry. Sorry, we're very wet this year. But the last 3 years, we were in a drought, borderline severe drought, borderline extreme drought, depending on where you draw the lines. And my clover seedings did not do well. This was the last time, seeding here was the last time I got a good clover seeding. And last year was absolutely terrible. This is the only field I got a good clover seeding in in 2022, quite frankly. The rest of them did not do well. We ran out of water. The rye shaded out the clover, and that was that. This year, we were so warm coming into March, I couldn't get anything frost seeded because there was no frost in the ground. There was no frost on the ground. And so I didn't throw a single seed of clover out there at all. And that's frustrating to me, but I know I have the ability to go in now after my small grain harvest and I'll use a mix. And my mixes usually look something like this. It's a little different every year. but it's all kinds of stuff. Like I said, I really like diversity, so I go with a high diversity mix. If you can identify more than 15 species in that sample, congratulations, because that's the highest number I got to. I know there's over 20, but I was able to pick out 15 that I recognized as far as seeds. It's nice having that kind of diversity when you have the opportunity. It looks really cool. You know, you get all these beautiful pictures. The neighbors get very excited. The townsfolk driving out into the country always want to stop and take pictures in the fall, and that's cool and all, but that doesn't make me any money. But what does make me money is all those roots working down in the ground and changing how the soil lays, changing how the water is able to soak in and cuts down on the runoff, eliminates my erosion. And this year, I'm really noticing that because we've been getting pounded with rain. Not as bad as other places, I recognize, but we've been really wet. And the neighbors that don't use cover crops have gullies and ravines and piles of dirt in the ditches. And the water's coming off my farm. It's clear, it's clean, and most of the water that lands on my farm is soaking in. It takes a really big rain for me to have much runoff at all now, thanks to this cover crop system that I've got going. And that's awesome. It means I'm soaking in, it's getting down into the subsoil. I'm going to have water for the next time the rain turns off. And that's important to me because I don't have irrigation here. Something I probably should have talked about was the way we seed our clovers. I use that drill there. I use that drill, and that's what I try to put my clovers on in the spring into my standing rye at frost seeding, if I can. If I can't get in, if I'm worried about tracking things up too much, then I'll go and broadcast. I've got one of the wigwag seeders that does a really good job of metering, and I can broadcast quite a lot of acres in a short amount of time. It's not as good as getting it so it's touching the ground, but it does okay. But only when we've got enough moisture, and only when there's a good frost to do the heave and thaw and get the clover to get down in the ground. Otherwise, I'm usually using the drill in the summertime after small grain harvest, and I get really good stands using that. So let's see, what do we got? We got 15. Okay, so yeah, there's all the trials. There's some of the resources that you can look through. I've kind of flown through this a little bit faster than I was planning, but that's how it goes. Get excited. And I'm not sure what else I need to talk about. That's pretty much what I've got. Those resources are there. If you want to learn more about using cover crops in your small grains or using cover crops in any farming system, I highly recommend looking at Practical Farmers of Iowa's website. They've got a ton of resources and thousands of trials that they've done over the years in different areas that would be very useful information to get you started. And then go look at other places as well, because never go to one source for your information. Yep.
Have you grown hairy vetch for seed?
I've not grown hairy vetch for seed. I keep looking at it as an opportunity, but I don't have a good way to keep it separate from my other grains. And I really worry about any of the seed that doesn't stay in the combine ending up being in the field for years, because I know vetch tends to have quite a lot of hard seed, and so that could be a risk in future years that I haven't figured out how to get around yet. So
wait, have you ever used non-dormant alfalfa alongside your clover as a nitrogen source?
So actually, I've got my oat field this year has only non-dormant alfalfa in it, underseeded with the oats. So we'll be doing that. I'll be taking those oats here in about a week and a half, I hope. But yeah, we do use non-dormant alfalfa, not very often because the seed cost is not particularly low. But in certain areas, I'd rather have the alfalfa out there rather than the clover. I like my clover because it's cheap and it's generally reliable in the right scenarios, but it also likes wet feet a little more than alfalfa. So like I've got to pick the right spot to put a non-dormant or regular alfalfa seeding anyway. I don't want to put it anywhere I'm going to get wet because it's just not going to perform as well as the clover. So there's, I pick and choose where I'm going to put things. So my non-dormant alfalfa this year, for example, is on ground with a very high sand content. So it's really well drained. And it looks fantastic, but I'm hoping I can get the oats off before the alfalfa gets any taller, because otherwise that may be a problem.
Yeah. Right. And then Margot was wondering here, what seeding method you generally use? Well, both of you can answer this one in your studies with the red clover.
For us, it was broadcast.
For mine in the trial that I showed, I drilled. It was drilled in, and I drill when I can, but I also broadcast. Like Heather said, if the conditions are too soft to get out there with that big equipment, I really don't want to screw anything up that's already established. And so broadcast is what I do as well. And as Heather said, if you have a broadcast that doesn't do a great job, or it's a little windier than you'd like, doing half rate and crisscrossing or doubling passes, it can help a lot. I've seen some really significant differences in fields where we went ahead and did the poor man's full spread and crisscrossed or whatever with a half rate. It can work. It's just